traveled through the day. Um, let's kick off this morning in Dubai with Matt Stanley, Director of Star Fuels. Matt, I'm not sure which was more surprised by, the collapse on Friday or yesterday's inability to hold on to the gains that the recovery that we're seeing the attempts again today to make the same recovery. Yesterday it failed. That was a bit of a surprise. Your thoughts on the collapse on Friday and the failed recovery yesterday?
Morning, Sean. Morning, everyone. That's why he's here. It's the only real bear I could find. So I thought I'd bring him in and he can offer me some support. No, look, you say the recovery's on. 25 minutes ago, we were trading at $70.50 on Brent for February contracts. We were down $2.50 a barrel. Look, I thought it was overdone on Friday. That was clear. I thought that there was some panic setting in. As Mike said on Sunday, that we don't know enough about this variant yet, this Omicron, but it's enough to spook the people who have been investing in the market. And if those same hedge funds can buy, they can sell as well. And I think that there's some P&L protection going on for Christmas. December is going to be, I think, a relatively volatile one for the oil trading market. It's people have had a very good year. Brent was trading at $45 a barrel this time last year. And then we had the vaccine announcements and we went up to $86 a barrel only 3 weeks ago. It didn't need much of a catalyst to get these guys going again, to spook some fear in the market. And I think that's what we're seeing, Sean. What is fear worth? It's a grim thing to price, but the funds are looking at COVID and they're not so much worried about COVID. They're worried about government reaction to COVID. And I think that's what's being priced in right now. If we test 70 again later on Feb Brent, because it's the last day of Jan contract, structure has collapsed from $1.20 on Friday. It's now worth 25 cents. Volume has been massive the last couple of days. I know Mike said on Friday that, volumes were low liquidity. There's 540,000 contracts trading in the Feb WTI contract on Friday. It was huge. So I think there's some general risk off and some P&L protection, but a recovery, it will happen at some stage after OPEC meet, but in the meantime, 70s, we're going to struggle to hold it, I think, on Brent.
Richard Radoglia, CEO of Matrix Global Holdings. Richard, it would appear the sort of oxygen that's pushing prices up this morning in Asia is the belief that at OPEC, who are meeting this week, supposedly, although they have postponed the first of those series of meetings, the JTTC, but nonetheless, there is rumors, soundings that OPEC are going to suspend their monthly increase, and so that's elevating the oil price. That's a big bet, I would think.
Well, I think it's interesting. I think that, and I'll make these statements, and you can agree or disagree with them. In the last 40 years, we've never seen so much OPEC cohesion, right? We've never seen information technology advance to the level it has now, where supply demand is being realized in real time. COVID, to me, is probably the best thing that ever happened to OPEC. Go back to March 3rd of last year, and Saudis, I think in the 5th time in their history, basically threatened the rest of OPEC and they collapsed the oil market. COVID comes along and they realize, oh, that was a mistake. Let's not do that again. And so I think this is going to be the time. The last 2 OPEC meetings have been 10 minutes long. When have OPEC meetings been 10 minutes long in your life, Sean? How many times have that been? It takes 10 minutes to order a drink at the bar in Geneva, not 10 minutes to have a meeting. So that's one thing. The second is that they're being threatened from all sides. The SPR release just recently by our government, brilliant. When is the time, we've known in the past, where OPEC reacts to an SPR release? I don't believe ever OPEC has adjusted their production on the back of an SPR release. That's one thing. And the last 2 things are, the green agenda is now fully engaged. governments and banks are saying, this is the way it's going, like it or not, money and investment decisions are going to go this way, which leads to OPEC, it's all well and good, but we're not going to want your oil in 10 years. To me, this is an extremely important meeting. I think this is probably the most important meeting we've had to date, because this is the meeting that they're looking the market in the face and they're saying, if you want to play the game with SPRs, if you want to test us, if speculative length wants to drive a market up, and I think Matt made a very good statement, and I've heard the statements from the prior meetings, markets don't fall $10 for no reason. That's speculative length being puked out of the market. This, I think, is going to be probably the most important OPEC meeting that we've had to date. And I would predict, on the last night's poll, I said that they would suspend the 400,000. This might be February of 2000, where Saudi said, we're taking 1 million barrels off the market. Let's say how you like that. That's, I think, what we could be headed towards.
That would be a pretty bold move in face of everything, the geopolitics of that alone.
I'll take back. I think they tend to just suspend. I think that's what they'll do, but that'd be my bet.
Randall Mohammed, Managing Director, Petro Industrial USA. Randall, there's one other meeting going on. There's actually a meeting going on in Vienna, unlike the virtual OPEC meeting that isn't happening, is the Iran nuclear talks started yesterday. And in the scheme of things, given all the language of Biden around getting this nasty little gasoline price down, maybe he's inspired to do a deal, to do a quicker deal than otherwise would be the case. Your thoughts on the ramifications of all things in Vienna with where Biden and where the U.S. may go in this deal?
Yeah. Hi. Good morning, Sean. Good morning, everyone. Look, Sean. That's definitely on the front burner for the president, as many presidents in the past. The ability to try and ease gasoline prices. I mean, just last month I was paying $3.19 per gallon. This month I'm paying $3.33, upwards of $3.40 per gallon. My son drives a Tesla. He's laughing all the way to the bank. It costs him just over $11 to fully charge his Tesla. It's costing me over $55 to fill my tank. And I suspect that's the burden of many Americans out there, especially as we've just come out of the Thanksgiving holiday season. But, even the release from the SPR, that 50 million barrels, that's going to be very short-lived. I think OPEC basically is going to brush that off. Look, that's equivalent to what, just over 130,000 barrels per day. Very short-lived. But,
Well, certainly one thing that would bend the curve in Biden's direction going into an election year would be allowing Iran to export 2 million barrels of oil.
Possibly. I mean, that could be on the table, but
it is on the table.
Yes, but
I mean, that's what they're fighting over.
Yes, I'm not sure if we're going to see that anytime materialize anytime shortly. At the same time, one can pitch the argument for Venezuela as well. Okay, if you're going to cut this deal with Iran, why not try to negotiate a similar deal with Venezuela and bring some of their oil onto the market? I mean, Guyana right now is pumping in excess of 130,000 barrels per day. And they're going to get up to about 1 million barrels by 2025, 2030. Let's see where it goes.
Yeah, well, clearly there's a lot of geopolitics around the urgency of the Iran question. Matt, big week for OPEC Plus, as Richard says. The meeting that was meant to take place has been postponed. They want to see some of the whites of the eyes of this Omicron. This is a terribly named virus, COVID variant. It sounds scarier and maybe it's as scary as it is. Perhaps that's the case. But nonetheless, we've seen Japan lock locked down, closed down. Israel closed down. The number of countries where this thing is emerging is growing, not kicking the door down yet, so to speak, but OPEC moving off its already existing agreement, I think, would be a big call. Your thoughts on them stepping away or suspending the current agreement based on the information that they have in their hands at the moment?
Well, I think that's the point. What information do they have in their hands at the moment? It's, oh my God, whatever it's called, and it looks like I'm wincing at your questions. I'm not, or I haven't got cramp either. I'm just looking at the markets, and we just hit $70.22 on Brent. It's only a minute ago that we were trading just under 71. So the situation is so fluid. You could have asked OPEC 2 hours ago what they were going to do, and they'd probably say, nothing to see here, move on. We're going to maintain current quotas, bring back 400,000. You ask them now, they're going, we probably need another couple of days to assess the situation. I think that the meeting will be kicked down the road a little bit. I don't think we'll hear anything. I think Saudi OSPs will probably be the biggest driver of the market over the next few days. That's going to be key because, look, if demand, it's only the perception of the hit of demand within the EU, and it is strictly within the EU. Where Randall and Rob are at the moment, it's business as usual. Thanksgiving last week and holiday season coming up, you should expect an uptick in demand on finished grade products. That should reflect in stats. That's another driver for bullish sentiment. However, the recovery was always fractured, and this only highlights that fracture itself. So I think the market is just generally looking at it, absorbing the news and thinking, do you know what? I don't like the sound of it. I don't like the way that stories now, again, it was only 2 months you had to search for news about COVID, and now they're front and center. I think OPEC will absorb that as well. I think that they will suspend bringing back 400,000 barrels of production. And I think that Rob was spot on saying, the swing producers, Saudi especially, will lead the way again, as they have. An integrity that's been built up over the last 18 months. They can't afford to let that slip. The group has always been something of a non grata from the end user point of view. That's been the oil market has OPEC to thank completely for its discipline over the last 18 months. At this stage, I think they will take their time. Does the market need more oil? No, it doesn't. It doesn't need more oil at the moment, especially with a hit to demand. And it's not just COVID over the last 5 days, Sean, where people have taken their gloves off. People were forecasting a surplus of crude oil by Q2 next year a month ago. So it needed a catalyst of some sort to really drive it down. But I think OPEC will take more time to make a decision than people think.
Richard, the meeting may be so short that it doesn't actually even happen in essence this week. Nonetheless, if countries go ahead with their OSPs, there may be no immediate urgency to actually pull a trigger this week and push it, because tomorrow is the UAE national holiday, 50th anniversary, and after another few hours getting the UAE away from that major moment in their history, I think will be a distraction, probably not welcome, particularly if it involves a really big decision. And so pushing it into next week looks increasingly possible. But Richard, I wanted to get your technical knowledge as a long-time trader, decades. What happened on Friday sort of broke through every technical part of the ladder, and $10, 12, 13%. And in the last two trading sessions, it's trying to rebuild some kind of model. Can you just talk us through the technical challenge that is inhibiting a recovery here?
I think you said it. It's a lot of money. Is it markets? I said this a few months ago, and it sounded, and I heard myself say it back on tape. It sounded dumb, but for markets to go up, they have to go down. And what I mean by that is you do need to flush out late. You do need to get speculative people out. You do need to cause a market to move into a range and build a base. We look at the Bitcoins of the world and these things, which their moves come from a long base. And I think what we've seen here is a liquidation. What's interesting about the move we've just seen in oil I think in two cases. One is the significant increase in volatility. We have seen a spike in volatility. I think volatility doubled, if I'm not mistaken, the other day. But it just didn't spike. It just didn't spike in flat price. It spiked on the spreads. Calendar spread options. I do. My Matrix Global does a lot of things in derivatives around storage, and calendar spread options to me are probably the bellwether of spread values. Right? A calendar spread option is just that. It is an option on the spread. Those spread values doubled last week. So the value of the calendar spread, we call it the flat price put for calendar 22, which means I believe the spread's going to go to zero, which it's not. The market was $6 in backwardation. The actual spread value of zero price spread doubled in value in 2 days. I don't think that's ever happened. And that just means the market doesn't know what to do. And when markets don't know what to do, they just become volatile. And they go back and forth and they get people out of their position. And I think that's what we've done from a technical perspective. We've just done damage. And now it's just going to take time and money, other people's money, to figure out where this range is going to be. And I think we're probably looking at 60 to 80 now in WTI for a while. And the question really is for all of us here, and I think everyone, is it's okay for now. Let's just assume we're in this range. But what about the future? And when do we start thinking about years 1 and 2 and 3 and the lack of investment in the oil sector and the push towards kind of the green technology? How is that going to affect price over time? And is really what happened? The reason we went to 80 is the green energy feels failing, and people are going to start consuming natural gas and coal, and it's going to affect oil in the form of power demand, and let's just get long. Well, that didn't work out. Now we puke it back out again. Now where do we go? So the technical damage is done. Now we're into a range.
But Randall, you just mentioned they're obviously coming out of the Thanksgiving weekend. All the numbers in the U.S. economic story still look very positive. The whole narrative last week was to accelerate tapering because the jobs report had come in so strong, and the consumption, deflation was getting out of hand. All of those things remain in place despite this development, right?
Undoubtedly, Sean. When you look at the numbers really look healthy. Thanksgiving was unbelievable. A lot of retailers enjoyed record sales. There was Cyber Monday, again, record sales as well. But I think the Fed is going to zero in on what we call leading indicators. And those lead indicators will really look at the amount of unemployment claims. If those unemployment claims begin to trend down, then that's one trigger to begin tapering. And of course, the other issue is inflation, right? Whether we can get back to that 2% average, I don't know. A lot of it has to do with constrained supply chains, and a lot of it has to do with liquidity in the system. Now, the Fed can control the liquidity by open market operations. They can begin to taper that asset buying, and they can also look at interest rate hikes, which I don't think, again, will occur before 2022. My forecast is that those hikes will occur probably in 2023. And of course, the variant introduces a whole new level of risk again for the Fed. So we're going to have to look at it very closely. We're going to have to monitor it very, very closely.
I mean, is the Fed a bit like OPEC plus? And maybe some of those oil traders that Richard's talking about, a deer caught in the headlights. What do we do now?
Yeah, well, Sean, they're going to have to look at the numbers. As I said, they're going to keep having to monitor those leading indicators. The S&P 500, again, is one of those indicators, and that seems to be doing fairly well. But we just don't know. There's so much uncertainty now around this variant. But I like what President Biden has said. He said there's room for concern, but let's not panic.
Don't panic. Don't panic. When anybody says don't panic, I think the only thing that happens is panic. Exactly. Matt, this clearly is a moment in which if this COVID variant had not been announced on Friday, would still be above 80. And yet, in this moment, we can't get off the floor away from 70 too far. We failed to climb yesterday. We failed so far today. What's changed, do you think?
Well, I just want to touch on something that Richard mentioned, which is a very good point, is that if we attribute where the rally was heading and what it was heading on the back of, the coattails it was heading on the back of, was the gas crisis. You know, there was an energy crisis, a BTU crisis, and people weren't able to heat those homes. Those issues are still there. It's not there's suddenly been okay, Russia has started to flow a bit more gas into Europe. But if you look at nat gas prices over the last 4 days, what they've done, nothing. You know, they've stayed steady. So the issues are still there, Sean. And again, that highlights who has been piling into the oil markets. It's not a fundamental reason per se. Otherwise, it would be an issue. It is flattened down. The curves are flat, like what Richard was saying about, you know, the flat price puts. Of course, people are looking at that. Panic is setting in. This is why OPEC will take their time, because it will be a fundamental reality that will kick in. I wouldn't be surprised, like I said earlier, if that goes with what Saudis do with OSPs, because if demand in Europe, like I said, is going to fall off a cliff, it's not going to fall off a cliff for gas, because people just won't be going to work or flying anywhere. They'll be at home heating. So the gas structure stays bid, as it always has done and as it should. But sentiment comes off because the recovery takes a hit. And as Randall said, the US Treasury will look at this, the Fed will look at this, and it kicks that can down the road, and it helps the inflation argument as well. So it's a big
Richard,
job that OPEC have got to do.
Richard, are we in the king has no clothes moment, that the sort of hubris and the fantasy of $60,000 Bitcoin and everything else that went with it, print? Are we in the zone of the king has no clothes and it's just a wake-up moment?
I hope not. I think that, to me, the greatest thing of all, and the fear has to be, is one day someone looks around and says, wait a second, you guys just printed another $6 trillion. You know, we talk about China, how strong they are. I think I was looking at some bank data where China has expanded its bank balance sheets like 5 times greater than what the US has done. You know, the empty cities, the craziness that we've just experienced here. We're living in a total bubble. This is a bubble of anything we've ever experienced. And I hope not, Sean. I hope things.
I still struggle on a very sort of basic level, and I know there's brainier people out there that somehow a piece of code can be worth $60,000. It's just somehow tulip-like to me. It just, I can't get there.
It is that. But let's go back to oil for a second. So if I'm looking at the data right, distillate demand's at 5-year highs in the US. Gasoline demand's at 5-year highs. Cracks are at 5-year highs. Stocks are at 5-year lows. It's real. To me, the mistake is, you know, let's put the different crazy box in its crazy box area. Put the Bitcoin over here. To me, the crazy box that we live in is this mentality of the green agenda, and how all of a sudden we're going to make this move. And on your, I think one of the best things said during your conference last week, the Oman conference, was this is a transition. This is supposed to be a transition to different energies. We're talking to politicians. I'm not sure if you guys are aware of this. The Energy Secretary of the United States was asked, what is the consumption of the US daily? And she said, I'll get back to you. Now, when the Energy Secretary says that, that means the kids are in charge. And in my mind, the greatest thing that's going on here, and it's going on now for about 2 years, and I saw this a couple of years ago, and I've been making this because I talk about storage so much. To me, we are in an OPEC plus led world that they will control, because they're being told by the politicians that their energy is no longer needed because it's going to become green. And I'll make one last statement. Green technologies, right, are designed for radiant energy and kinetic energy. And I read a great article about this, that they are inherently random. Those two energy forces are inherently random. And the second law of thermodynamics, which controls the world, says the world is always heading towards chaos. So we're determining that we're going to bet our energy future on two forms of energy which are inherently random. You don't build baseload power on inherently random types of energy. You build it on coal and natural gas and things that when you hit the switch, the lights go on. And we're not doing that. And we're not doing that anymore.
The king is, as though close moment here might be this idea that we're in a tight market when we just talked about Iran has 2 or 3 million barrels over. Yeah, not tomorrow. Not, you know, Venezuela has the largest oil reserves on the planet stuck under the ground. The narrative that we have a shortage of oil supply does seem hard to really, when you take a moment to think about that, perhaps that's the moment here. Let's get a survey question and then get Randall back into this. Will Brent crude oil end the week? This week we are in. Closer to 80, closer to 70,
Where's
closer
50?
to 65. Oh, you're a naughty
50?
boy. You're a naughty boy.
Is there a three-headed coin we can flip?
Well, there's all of the above, but you got to choose one that's on the page anyway. 65 is the closest you got there, Matt, to your 50 or whatever you were talking about. But closer to where do we end this week with the mountain of OPEC to still climb through? Place your bets, so to speak, and we will see where we go. Randall, the rest of the week, it seems a little bit froth. We're going on big holidays here in the UAE. The rest of the Middle East, not so much. But I mean, we will continue on this podcast through the week. But nonetheless, there are holidays, there are distractions. Where do you think this week is going to end up?
In terms of the oil price, or in
the markets? I mean, oil price, we're particularly interested here, but I think all markets are looking a little bit for direction, and we've have initial soundings out of Vienna with the Iran talks. We've got Japan and Israel and one other country, I can't remember which one, that has closed down to foreign travel. Will we have other countries? Will this snowball? I mean, there's a variety of things to look at.
Right. Yeah, look, I mean, it is worrisome. There is room for concern, but, you know, Sean, we've been there and done that. You know, this is not, this new variant is not the only game in town. We've been through almost, half of the Greek alphabet anyways. And, you know, if you listen to the science part of it, what I'm hearing is that this new variant, yes, it may be contagious, but it's not the symptoms are not as severe as, let's say, the Delta, for example. So I think the market is going to have to digest this. OPEC is going to have to digest this. Yes, I understand that these countries are going on lockdown, but we must not lose focus. The focus right now is to get people vaccinated. You know, the US right now is just about 60% double vax. You know, we got to continue to get jabs in arms. We got to try and get to that 70-75% so that we can get herd immunity. And then all will be well.
Kumbaya, my lord, kumbaya.
You're losing it, Sean. It's getting a little much for you.
That sounds slightly optimistic nonetheless. But Matt, your thoughts of where this week goes? I mean, ultimately, we have the privilege of not having to sit in the seat of many decision makers who've got to make some big calls in the coming days. But put yourself there. What calls do you make if you're Saudi energy minister? What calls do you make if you're some of your clients?
Look, it's I completely understand and agree with what Richard and Randall have said about things in the US. You know, Richard was saying about stocks being at a 5-year low, but demand being at a 5-year high. With all respect, the market is looking beyond.
If that is the case, why is it that not driving up prices today?
Well, because it's just the US, right? The market is a global one, and vaccination rates, especially here where we are in the UAE, and my home country in the UK, the governments have actually pushed this forward and it's done exceptionally well. It's still below 10% in Africa, Southeast Asia, China is still shut, almost justified as to reasons why. Like you said, Japan, if you have to park specific areas, right? The US is fine. Move on, nothing to see here. Vaccination rates still need to increase, but it's not the be all and end all of oil demand and sentiment. It's a global product. And whilst some pockets of areas are doing really well, and it's manageable, and variants are something that look, Professor Chris Whitty, who's a hero of mine, a Christmas crush, he said that 6 months ago, I will be standing here in front of you in 6 months' time talking about the latest variant. Of course, he's right. We have to learn to deal with it. But there are countries that are still not even coping with it. Africa as a continent is in a terrible state. South Africa, unfortunately, what's happened, borders are shut. So again, look, I think OSPs, Saudi will look at it, and I think that they will, where they want to sell their crude, which would be Southeast Asia and the Far East, I think that they will weaken those OSPs. But I think to the States, they'll become more expensive. They'll follow market trends, Sean, who's doing better and who's doing worse, because they want to maintain, harmony as best they can. And as the de facto OPEC leader, I think others will follow what they will do. But I don't see it coming out really until Monday or Tuesday next week, what we really hear.
Let's get the survey result to give Richard the last word. So the slight majority on 70 in this room, and a growing number probably leaning on 65. Richard, in some ways, in your closing comment, if you might address, this is no longer about the COVID moment of last Friday. This is about a market structure that got severely disrupted, as so many other industries have over recent years. But this is a disruptive moment triggered on this occasion by this COVID variant that nobody knows much about. But nonetheless, it was a disruptor. It wasn't the thing. It's what being disrupted. The market has been disrupted. Why is it being disrupted and is unable to recover, at least yet?
I think our poll there told us that no one really knows. I think that was the one thing about the poll, but let's assume that. But I think what it says is that, and I went back and looked at, I tend to look at the market through the curve. The curve to me always tells me kind of where things are. The curve is now for the 1 to 12 WTI spread is $3.30. That was the price where the curve was in February or January 25th of 2020. It's kind of been where it was for most of the past years leading into the COVID collapse. To me, we're in a new world where information is moving so radically and so fast that people are expressing their opinions rapidly. High frequencies trading. Markets don't fall $10 overnight without speculative interest. We collapsed that. The news became so bullish on the basis of natural gas and coal demand and UK prices quadrupling in Asia, that caused money to come in from everywhere. And I think the market's kind of calming down and saying, okay, maybe we overreacted. But the common denominator, I think, will remain. OPEC Plus is looking at a new world, and their decision is going to be, not that who am I to say what their decision is going to be, but their decision is, how do I supply a market which effectively is oversupplied? I've already put the Permian into a new world. They're kind of taken care of now. It's controlled by Chevron and Exxon. They're not going to increase like the other Permian producers. How do I control a world where there's too much oil? And I'm going to take my time. I'm going to make sure I don't put too many barrels out there, because I can look at demand now in real time. And I remember years from now, I'm being told that no one wants my oil. And I think that's what makes this move so important. This is a flush out of recent length, but I think it's going to be this next few weeks, to me, is going to be a window into how are we going to treat the world with OPEC in charge.
Sean, can I just add what Richard just said there, which I thought was really interesting from what Mike said just quickly, is that the incremental Chinese buyer isn't there at the moment, and there's going to be a surplus of Atlantic Basin crudes. That's Mike saying that, and he's perennially bullish, of course he is, but without that incremental buyer lifting those cargoes as they have done over the last 2 years, that's a real sign of where we are fundamentally.
Well, you've just stolen my out comment, which is, while we've all been distracted by the SPR and all of these things. Meanwhile, China is still wounded, and I was going to add to that point, which is South Korea. On our digest today, South Korea's factory output in October shrank at its sharpest pace in nearly a year and a half. 2 months in a row, it's down 3% in October, 1.1 in September. This is a trend. South Korea being a major manufacturer, of course. This instance, it would appear the lack of microchips is triggering some problems there, but nonetheless, some real big incremental energy demand countries in Asia are wounded, are not there at the moment to pick up the slack as they have been in many of these recent years. And perhaps that's one of the reasons why this bubble has remained prick, so to speak. Well, let's see where things go. OPEC Plus due to meet. We'll be here every morning, 10:30 UAE time through the week until we get really distracted by the Dubai Sevens, and then we will be gone. But until then, Randall, Mohammed, lovely to have you on. Richard, as always. Matt, thank you so much. And we'll see where things go. Fascinating and fun, and maybe not so much for others too. But nonetheless, it's a unique moment, and it's good to see it. Cheers. All the best.
Cheers.